Hello, good morning to nobody. This is very strange trying to do this, talking to nobody. Hi, I'm Shane. I'm a nurse, and I'm about to be unemployed, and I can't wait for that. Um, anyway, I thought I would try and make a video to talk about what's going on in healthcare, um, with the vaccines, with mandating people to have vaccines, with the COVID surge. Um, And I feel like I have um, perspective to speak on some of those issues anyway. First of all, I've been a nurse for 10 years, nearly anyway. I started off working um, in the ICU with neurological traumatic brain injury patients. Um, and I did that for 7 years. Then I moved on and I did a non-clinical role for a year and a little bit more administrative work, some of the behind the scenes stuff. After becoming so burnt out, ICU nursing. And most recently, in December, I started to work on our medical ICU, taking care of the sick COVID patients and um, going through all those challenges, climbing that mountain. um, and here we are. Uh, so at the beginning of this pandemic, I think I felt it was important to um, remain quiet, to listen to what people have to say, what ideas surface as a result of um, calamity or this collective crisis. And it was very interesting coming out of a kind of a rough spot of my own in my life and dealing with integrating the worst parts of myself into something that's productive, and something that I can be proud of uh, to deal with the world. Um, and so, with that perspective, looking at how is a society going to deal with something, um, whether it's overblown or factual or not, it doesn't matter really because I think the collective feeling was that we were in crisis and people withdrew to their natural instincts very quickly. Now, what does that mean? I think um, ultimately it provided transparency towards people's motivations, and then it also provided uh, clarity. Um, it shined a light on those people who have clearly not thought about these deep issues enough, um, and are seemingly grasping onto very surface answers and or um, jumping on the bandwagon to their tribe, let's say, and becoming so rigid ideologically on both. I'm not condemning one or the other. I think both sides of the story have been ideologically rigid to a fault, and just watching that kind of play out in a professional setting, especially, and then just culturally, um, has been eye-opening for sure. And so I think that I think I have a lot to say on the issue. I just don't quite know exactly how to get there, or what's going to get me there, or, what people are needing to hear. Um, Overwhelmingly, by and large, the messaging is very overblown. Um, Whether it's speaking from the frontline individuals or whether it's the people who just read the media and talk about the latest issue, Delta variant, Delta plus, and all these catchphrases. And why do we have to do that? why do we have to market this pandemic? Why do we have to, what seems like the news sources, even me personally, coming on and making a video about this? What's at the root of it? Why do we need to be in the know? I wake up, you feel like you need to know what's going on. There's this resurgence, this wave going to come. What's happening? People are vaccinated. People are unvaccinated. Is it their fault? Is it the masks? Is it the governance? Is it the healthcare? Is it the people's personal hygiene? What's going on? And I don't know what the right answer is, but I think that we've come far enough along where we know enough about what the wrong answers are, or at least a feeling of such. Um, so let me get to me being unemployed. Um, I'm not yet, actually. But I will be very soon. So I work for a big corporation here, and they will be mandating the vaccine as soon as it is FDA approved. My wife and I have made the choice for our family that we are both not going to get vaccinated, and we have our reasons, and I don't feel like I have to defend myself. But there are reasons, and we have them, and we've thought about them. So that's enough, and it should be enough. And so 2 weeks after that, or 6 weeks after they mandated, they'll ask for my voluntary resignation. In an area of nursing, I deal directly on the front line in the medical ICU, where we are paying nurses almost triple time, $90 an hour. I make around 30. To come and do a job in a system which requires people to be veteran trained. It requires people to be functioning at the highest level in a system, to know all of the inner working pieces, to know who to contact when, ultimately for the safety of the patient, right? Those things can't happen when we have vagabond staff coming in and getting overpaid to do a let's say a cumulatively less amount of work based on their capabilities of knowing their work environment. And so what does that do? What does that do to the psychology of the staff? What does that do for the patients? What does that do for the care? These things aren't talked about. What is it like to be in a COVID assignment at the bedside? Is it, gloom and doom? Is it, I think that even talking, if I imagine sitting and talking down to a nursing colleague who is unfamiliar of ICU level nursing and what that all entails, I think that there's some things that are surprising or should be surprising. And I think that there's some things that people should understand are clearly, the stories are unpersonal, and it kind of it stirs something up in me where it kind of makes me feel almost disgusted when people talk about this pandemic as a solely collective issue, and we're all in this together. That kind of verbiage, when the real stories are not that. It's the patient who, you're trying to get them to call their family because you're going to put a breathing tube down their mouth, and they can hardly breathe, but they're still aware. But that once you put the breathing tube down their mouth, that 3 weeks later, you'll end up taking them down to the morgue, and without the opportunity to talk to their family. And so they lose their voice, they lose their wind, they lose the air in their lungs, literally. And that I think that symbolically speaks to something larger going on, because I think we've all lost the wind in what we're saying and why we're saying it, and what we think it means. Uh, you hear a lot about virtue signaling and um, this kind of, I would call it like a tendency to grab the lowest hanging ethical fruit. And that's kind of where we are. We see these other ICU nurses who are speaking out about the atrocities and how terrible short it is and how much work it is. And guess what? Um, that type of sob story leads to pity, and I think pity is the worst of all feelings you could have for somebody. You shouldn't seek pity. Um, it's it's either there or not. And so culturally, at least in my circles of people that I interact with, all I've heard is, "Wow, hear those nurses. Just do your dang job. You signed up for it." Um, blah blah blah. That's I can sympathize with that. Um, and at the same time, they're missing those types of stories, like I just alluded to. You're missing that because I think that's the most important part. Um, and maybe we can unpack that a little later. But um, so, how does that virtue signaling and how does that all tie into leading people to be either leaving the profession or forced out, whatever mandated? Well, I think it deals with a couple things. One is a sense of meaning. Where are we getting our meaning in our work? Um, and two, I think it has to do with um, these ideological edifices that we're building um, in university or even um, any institute of higher learning, I guess, where the wrong values of why we're working are being used. Um, for instance, so like nursing, ask any nurse, why do you want to be a nurse, right? And the common answer is, well, I want to care for people and I want to, serve them like Jesus, and I want to be there for them when they're in a time of need. Um, all this, kind of virtuous stuff. Um, and it's like, well, yeah, great, good. That's okay. That's your starting point. Now, um, now that we have this kind of higher order goals, okay, I get it. That's your ethos. That's where you want to exist in. Well, then there's the other counterpole to that. With those great things, what must be sacrificed? Well, um, currently, what's being asked to be sacrificed is not being fulfilled ultimately at the end. What do I mean by that? So, what do we do as a nurse? More often than not, is end up bathing our patients, end up cleaning their excrement, end up being there in those most vulnerable moments. And what's lost in that story is that it's vulnerable for both parties. Um, you're breaking down yourself to symbolically get on your knees and wash someone's feet. That physical act takes something from you personally, um, and it takes something from the other person personally too. And so there's this connection there. I would call that connection the logos, right? That's how I would describe it. Um, and that logos, or the truth, the word spoken, is gripping to your core. And so if you're doing that as a profession, day in and day out, um, the truth ends up uncovering your motivations um, in a very scary way, right? Because you could do it for a week, and you can do it for a year and 2 years, and well, then what? You know, how far do these virtuous motivations of caring for people and loving like people, loving like Jesus, like how far does that get you? And I'm not saying that people that say that they want to love like Jesus are misguided. I'm saying that these people that are in these higher level education systems are using that as a guise to kind of pretend like that counterpole doesn't exist, where the truth is going to uncover in all the ways that you're not like that, right? And so then you decide when you're in that moment and you have that task to do, um, being a higher educated individual who's enlightened um, should be able to delegate that to somebody who's less superior, right? So that there's this natural hierarchy. Well, yeah, but those hierarchies are actually destroyed in the university. And so what do you get? You get this work environment where there is supposed to be delineated tasks up and down the let's say the adoption of responsibility um, based on their economic reimbursement. You get this unilateral untrust towards the task. Um, I'm bitter that I have to do it. The person that I'm delegating it to is bitter that I'm delegating it to them because I'm equally as competent to do that task, right? And then on the order end of things, this kind of backflows into the tasks that are ordered from the top, um, either administratively, like documentation, um, or other administrative type systems tasks, and or from the doctor's orders, which they are ordering you to do things based on their perceived level of importance. You see, so that kind of throws a wrench in the entire system from the very bottom, right? And so this one issue, this very, very seemingly simple, cleaning somebody up when they've gone to the bathroom in the ICU, turns into this kind of moral existential dilemma where it exposes hierarchies, it exposes the virtues that are motivating your behavior, and ultimately leads to a, let's just say, a decreased quality output. And so, I think I don't know that there's many people that look at it like that. I don't know that maybe you have to, and it's probably not imperative that you need to see that like that. But I started running into issues probably 5 years into nursing. I came from an environment where um, your worth was proven through your work. Your uh, your let's say intentions didn't matter, but the end goal of getting it done did. And there's a lot of value to that, especially in a competitive environment, because you'll always find a way to get it done, and you're getting it done for you personally as your personal goal. Um, and then collectively, you see that shine from you, and it impacts the person that you're doing it for. And then down the line for trusting relationships when people see you do that stuff. Well, this type of let's call it meritocracy doesn't work in a hospital setting um, as it's currently designed. And so let's pretend, we call ourselves teams, all of the literature. I suppose I should give my education background, but it's not important here. The leadership education, the leadership literature currently focuses on these very inverted power structures that incorporate team principles into close working groups in order to, let's say, catalyze collaboration and a ultimately sense of involvement or sense of meaning in your work. But what they don't get is that I think my critique of that is that the end product of healthcare is not winning. Maybe it should be. We say that it's the quality of care that we provide to our patients, but what I would say is defined by what? Defined by currently what I think the hospital wants to look at, um, in cahoots with the Joint Commission, their regulation body. But you see, when somebody sets these goals and there's this team that exists to try and accomplish those goals, well, if there's never an endpoint that you reach, I'm like, what do we, we're just going to keep striving for higher numbers. I'm like, that's kind of like the virtuous student that it leads to these empty promises of fulfillment, where the leadership structure is saying, this is the goal and this is the target to shoot at. And then this is the team who might miss 50% of the time and might hit 50% of the time. And then it doesn't matter what they end up perceiving is that it does not matter to me in my existence whether or not I miss 50% of the time or 35. Whereas that might be a collective guilt that's spread and then just accepted based on the way that it is. Whereas a meritocracy-based team will see that 50% and say, no, that's not good enough. And neither is 51 and neither is 52. And because they personally, I think, were designed to create something better. We need to move forward instead of saying that we're moving forward. We feel that we're moving forward. It's a sense of meaning that we get, not necessarily checking off the corporate goals. Right, and I'm kind of laying out this general critique of corporate systems as a whole. But you see, the person that's working as the team and it's still functioning as a meritocracy in that system ends up burning all of their own fuel with no reward, right? And so then kind of these nefarious personal goals end up surfacing, not all of them that I'm proud about necessarily, and get to that one day, but I think that I can be brutally honest enough to say that not only did those hospital type systems promote bad work, I think they prevented good work, which might be worse. In this collective striving towards mediocrity. And so these systems have to function then as they're scrambling for meaning, because I think they can sense this. They have to function as a, let's say, an arbiter of all things good. And they kind of will then, I think, surface in calamity as the savior figure, which is mythologically incorrect. That's the role of the institution is to be the walled garden. It's the establishment that is safe, not safe place, but safe so that you can venture out and make mistakes and come back and be healed in the garden, right? Sorry, I'm speaking symbolically. I might do that quite often, but I hope that these analogies will at least help paint a little picture. And so when there's this global pandemic, like I was talking to, everyone has these rigid ideological structures that they fall back into. And the walled garden is something that people fall back into. And then the walls might break. And then the savior comes from afar, maybe has left and then returned to come back and shed light on the situation. Like the allegory of the cave, right? Hey guys, there is more. There is a light casting shadows, and that's what we are seeing. And traditionally, the story narrative says that the walled garden doesn't believe them. What I'm seeing is almost completely different than that narrative. It's the walled garden turns into the savior of itself, Um, it's pretending to be all at once the godly father figure, the source of all security, while also being the spawn of new life and the resurrection of what could be. Um, and as you see in the Christian narrative, those two things aren't the same. They're the same um, as God, but not the same role. That's why they're different. That's why the stories are told as if they're separate, um, Father, Spirit, Son, because they have to, in our minds, function. This is speaking outside of the religious um, let's say doctrine, just speaking it just as a theoretical pattern of the world, um, that the Father has to exist to be that person who brought you into life before you were there, and kept you safe, but could not redeem you from the fall. Right? The Son has to do that. It's a new spawn of life. It's something to strive forward to, who's a spawn of the Father. Right? And how do we do that? Through interactions of the Spirit. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's back up here. How did this hospital conversation turn into this, let's say, the religious manifesto? Well, um, I think what you're seeing is what I'm perceiving, at least. I say what we're seeing as a metaphor, right? As John Vervaeke would talk about. Um, we're seeing these religious tendencies pop up in just normal decision making, and I think that the masks unveil those types of behaviors, quote unquote, unveil. And this type of religious mindset, I think, is needed, like in the core of our meaning, all the time, but especially when there's this crisis, because it creates that chasm where we can see clearly into the wound, and the wound needs meaning, and meaning can be found in all things religious. But those who have no religious construct will ultimately create icons out of the culture, um, and um, so one of those icons is the mask, right? It's an easy visible thing where it's a mandate from the higher ups, the person above, um, and its overarching goal is to create collective safety of the others. So therefore, if I'm doing it and you see me doing it, then I am all at once falling in line of order, while also choosing to do so to better your livelihood. Right? It's like this. You hear people say, "Just wear a mask. It's easy, right? Easy," and I agree with that, 100%. Especially if you're symptomatic, coughing, wear a mask, right? That's for sure. Keep whatever you can in, all the science that tries to realize efficacy of masks, I think is misguided. It's not an issue of rationalizing effectiveness. It's it's this, on the other hand, this spiritual virtuosity that's needed culturally, so that we can perceive that we're in this together, and I'm doing it to better your life. So you should see that, and in my mind, you should also make the the same claim. And if you haven't thought about it like that before, I think it's worth highlighting, because when you use that same kind of reasoning with other corporate, um, let's say, mandates, it makes sense, in a scary way, in a way in which um, it's troubled me, and our family very greatly. My wife and I, we both work in healthcare, um, and we've been. I'm sorry, I'm struggling to say this. It's not not an easy subject by any matter. Our actions going forward after this vaccine mandate and what we're going to do with work, no matter what, will be miscommunicated, probably to everybody that sees it, right? It's such a personal decision that my wife and I have been intimately involved in together, um, that there's no way that someone could know why or why not I chose, unless they asked me, and wanted to know. That's the other important piece to that. And that experience has been nothing short of religious. Um, this this process of uh, um, it's almost like creating an infant that is an action together as a couple. Um, and I mean that having kids and knowing what that's like, and then feeling that shared collective responsibility to nurture that um, as best as possible for the other person. That doesn't mean that we're making decisions for each other, but with each other, intimately guided by the Spirit, and you can feel that. Just like my example of cleaning up a patient and what that logos means. And so when you feel those things, it makes you, it breaks, I think it gives clarity and unveils you from the deeper sense of purpose or the virtues that lie behind your actions, um, which can be extremely humbling. It doesn't. It feels. I feel at peace about. Hey, I have to. As a family, we're going to not get vaccinated, and it's going to leave us in a place of unemployment, and it's by choice. And so there's this responsibility piece where it's like, well, if you break the ship, you better fix it. And then there's also this moral obligation piece, like just get vaccinated. It's the easy thing to do, and also you'll keep your job, and people will see you as this virtue. So it's like this low hanging fruit. So all at once, the decision that we are making is not the practical choice. It is not the easy choice, and it is probably not the most advised choice, I would say, even from the people that I interact with, because based on what they would do, but we're doing it anyway, and I think that needs to be. I need to say that to somebody. That's part of the reason why I'm making this video. But I need to. That needs to be known, that there's people that are doing that. Um, I'm not looking for recognition. I think that people need to know. Um, there's all this controversy. Someone I watch on YouTube, Brett Weinstein, he's getting a bunch of feedback. He's getting canceled because of his vaccine hesitancy, his truthful pursuit of science, and the presentation of such. And then also looking at alternative means for treating a viral illness that exists globally. How dare him? And someone brought up to him that being a martyr could be, let's say, euphoric, and that struck me. First of all, it struck me that it was important to ask it all, because who are you to judge whether or not someone is a martyr, unless they're explicitly telling you that? And second of all, I think that that's an easy, secular way to compartmentalize, let's say, fringe behavior. oh, those, that person um, is a Muslim, but they were a martyr, and this is what happened. And so then they chunk all of those things into separate categories: incident, reason, um, moral standing, or something like this. Where I think that that's wrong. I think that that's backwards. Um, and I think that, or at least I feel like what I feel the most is sorrow, because my wife and I could not have come to this decision without significant work together, without having gone through situations where we've had to make difficult decisions. Um, let's say without the aid of I'll say parents, but like I don't mean parents explicitly, but like parental advisory. Um, there's a point where in a marriage or in a relationship or in life, you get to a place where you can no longer ask your father for the help, because you know that um, he won't be able to provide you any, right? And that's a scary place to be. It's a scary place when you realize that's the place to be. It's dangerous if you realize that you're not there, um, because you may heed bad advice. Um, anyway, so I was talking about the burnt out nature of what people are experiencing, and nursing is so short right now. No, there's there's no way to reconcile the amount of short positions, the amount of money that they're paying travel assignments, um, and to do that, and then seemingly be very discriminatory towards their employees. And it really shows you where their priorities are. Um, and some would say, well, why would it be a bad thing if their priorities were set on the collective good? And my answer to that would be that's probably the most virtuous thing you could do, and it would be beneficial for everyone to have thoughts like that. But they need to make sure that they clean up their act first, um, it- because of the reasons that I kind of got into in that which the crisis kind of makes the wounds pure. They realize them in a way that it can be seen by all. The scabs are torn off, the holes are exploited, and therefore human nature takes over. Um, we got nurses talking about doing a 60-person strike, and we got nurses talking about demanding more pay and getting a union, and all of these other conversations. And uh, that's that to me is it's an overreaction to problems that are too late to address with such measures, I guess. Um, the the decision for hospitals and the nation and private institutions to mandate vaccines is, um, well, I don't know about the nation, but for sure for a private institution, um, that should be your prerogative. If that's what you see to be the most beneficial option for you and your employees, and everyone around, I guess, then that's your thing, right? But you have to have properly weighed the consequences, and um, the consequences are that you're making a difficult job more difficult. You're making an unattractive place to work um, unattainable, and you're making the demanded level of care unimaginable. Um, and I say those things with great conviction. Um, that there are bigger things that we are not able to see. And when people in leadership positions are unable to, or seemingly, let's say, they're not willing to make the choices necessary, they're not willing to make the decisions, take the decisions seriously, and the ramifications that could lead into. So what do I think needs to happen? I think what needs to happen is that there's going to be this great exodus of nursing, and it'll be kind of like this forest fire of impurity. These people that have impure intentions will vacate the profession. There's nothing in it for them. There is nothing in it for the patients to be taken care of by them. And still others, there will be people leaving the profession that the healthcare system will greatly miss. There's experiences, there's lives that could be changed, and there's, let alone the professional help that some of these nurses would provide to their cohort. Just thinking of one nurse who resigned a couple weeks ago, who I respect greatly. And just to, the thought doesn't just stop at, wow, those patients are going to miss him. And they don't know it. But it's also those patients and also the patients that would be taken care of by someone who he had trained, who had walked in his footsteps. I mean, you see that legacy kind of just goes and goes and goes, and it's very fruitful. But when you don't see those trees growing, when you don't see the seeds that are planted in the firm soil, that's a very scary place to be when it's a big ship. When something has been able to grow so large with such little foundation, it's only a matter of time before it topples. And I hope that doesn't happen. But I also don't see anybody having the conversation about what's going on. Part of the conversation needs to start with being truthful with what we're seeing. Were the hospitals full? Yes. Were they a lot more full than I've ever seen them? 100%. It was scary at times, really. There was issues that were actually life-threatening, that shouldn't have been there. And the resources that are normally in excess were being tapped into. I would say that we weren't necessarily short of things. And I think that the human ingenuity always shines, especially in moments of great need, right? And I think that there was no better time that the hospital was functioning, let's say, in a right-brained mentality. If you're familiar with McGilchrist's work, Right Brain, Left Brain, Master and His Emissary is the book. But we use, so just to summarize, we use our right brain for exploratory function, and we use our left brain for rationalized, concrete, known things, known patterns. Like I'm sitting at my desk, I know where my keyboard is, where my mouse is, I can reach and grab it. And I can do so, I can move the mouse around my screen, and I can do these things without having to think about them. They're ingrained as a pattern in my left brain. And we do these at work all the time, right? And it's people, I think they enjoy that. I think that people, when they get into that type of mentality, they feel like they're firing all cylinders. But I think that the reason that they can do that, I don't know, I think, but and people have said this, I could have this wrong, but is because that the left brain patterns then afford you, to use the word John Vervaeke uses, affords you the opportunity to use your right brain to explore the things around you. And when you're in that type of gripping flow state. That's it's a bad use of the word flow, I think, but where you're in this kind of moment where you're doing your task, but you're also exploring and you're looking for new things. And you need to look for new things because it's unknown and you don't know what's going to come up, and you don't know how you're going to tackle it. So you have to turn on all of your possibilities. All of your patterns are activated. All of the situations that you've been through that are similar are kind of beginning to mold into a narrative, and you're creating this all in your head, and um, it's happening in an instant, and I think that's a dopamine, that's a kick. People love that. You can see it, and they're working, they're asking questions, they're making mistakes, um, and they're vulnerable, but they're confident and they're brave, and all of those kind of fringe emotions that you don't feel, let's say, driving to work, right? Um, those are the things that happen when you are, I think, first of all, grounded in good foundation, and have a good sense of meaning in yourself, and then are out in the world tackling challenges, um, to not only better yourself, but also to spread that better, to create more. Um, and that's ultimately, I think, just imperatively selfless, uh, because you the things that are in your left brain become yourself. That becomes who you are and what you're doing, and then everything outside becomes um, God's creation in the narrative sense. It becomes something to create with. It becomes the bin of Legos. It becomes the building blocks, the stuff that you can use to better reality, that you can use to build a better map, to use to um, maybe, to use a grandiose term, to be the savior of the system, right? But those things are only accepted as a consequence that you are seen as the savior of the system. Because you could very well bring back the Book of Ancient Secrets and nobody can read it. And so what do you do with that? What do you do when this is the dilemma that you face at work, and people are dying, literally dying on you, in ways that you've never seen before? Our science is clearly not enough. We can keep a lot of people alive, right? Clearly not enough. And you can see these people stretching out on a limb, right? Hydroxychloroquine, all of these kind of these quick interventions that people can come up with and say, hey, maybe this will work. Like we see this and this and this and this, and you have the proper skeptics, and they're well, this and this and this, and they argue it out, and then in the end of the day, the person has to make this intuitive call because there is no left brain pattern in a global pandemic for our healthcare system currently, right? We don't have the patterns set in place unless you're the CDC, and then you create it, and you top down prescribe it as a guideline, which I think should be a sin, that word, and uh, and literally a sin, because it misses the mark. It doesn't do what you want it to do, because, to kind of go back to the left right brain, right? We have patterns in our brain, in our mind, and then when we're using them, we use our right brain to modify, right? But not in medicine, not current medicine. I was in nurse practitioner school. I dropped out with a year left because I'm a failure. No, because the work was so prescriptive in the sense that I was not treating you. I was applying a guideline to you, based on what you were telling me. And I think that that's wrong. I don't think that that's right. I think that it's misguided at its root, and it's a broad net that corporations cast um, to try and save everything but the remainder. It's an attempt to guide the most amount of people with the most amount of knowledge throughout time, and I think that it's useful in very small subset of cases. Um, it's useful as this is how an analogy that I would use. It's as useful as if I gave you a guideline on how to fix a small engine on your lawn tractor. And the guideline is peer reviewed, and there's a bunch of mechanics that looked at it and they said, "Yep, that's the guideline. That's the one. Um, that'll do it. That's the best we would do." And you get in your garden tractor and you put down the guideline and you open up the hood and you see the nut, and it says nut 1 on the picture. But this is bolt 2, and it was replaced by the previous owner with a tool that you don't have. And so already the guideline's out of the window, right? But you can keep going, and you go down and um, you're unscrewing the other bolt that you can get off, and then it breaks. All right, and you kind of see where this is going. Where there's so many possibilities that you could deviate from the guideline, that eventually it becomes meaningless. It becomes this tattered mess, and ultimately, what I think we run into as a healthcare system is that we end up saying, these are our guidelines, and this is a patient who fit in the guideline, and we did our best, but it didn't work out. And so then the guideline is then just not a catch-all of the patients, but it's a catch-all for your monetary reimbursement. Ultimately, it's hey, we did this because AHA said so, and therefore we are not liable. And it's like, that's great, right? That's pretty good. I get it. You gotta protect yourself. It's good for the institution. It's good for the workers there. It does create a little freedom, but freedom within the guideline, right? And so then, something new, novel, coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, and people are, these physicians who might be inclined to step out on a limb and say, "Hey, ivermectin is an antiparasitic that might work. It might work for this." I'm not saying it is. Just have a gut. We've used it a couple times before on similar infections, and these people are responding well. And you see, so that's where the guideline affords that type of thinking. It's like, all right, got the guidelines in place. Turns out it's all supportive care. So let's try and think of something different. Let's not wait until their lungs turn into rocks and then try and ventilate them by pushing air as their alveoli can't oxygenate. Sounds fun. So these critical care physicians, i.e. Pierre Corey, who's getting canceled collectively, which is a great sin. I don't know the guy. Maybe he's an asshole. Probably not, though. And they come up with these solutions, and then everybody berates him from their moral high ground. Right? How dare you? How dare you think that you are better than everybody, right? And you get this collectivist attitude where the states are better than the individual. And we've seen this in history. And it scares me that people are failing to make those parallels, right? The state cannot be more powerful than the individual, ever. Period. Because it not only does it not promote the best behavior or the best decisions made by the hospital or its constituents, it helps people hide bad choices. And for instance, if this COVID, if any protocol had some step in it that we knew not to be working, you know what? But the hospital prescribes it, and the CDC said it, and it's really not it's not hurting. Um, and so you know what? I'm just better just to not say anything, right? I'm the physician, but there's plenty of other doctors, and so I just show up and I do my job. And well, the problem is then uh, that same logic is applied to something that's not only not working, but is harmful, right? And if at the beginning you've made this stance, this hardline ideological stance that the state's guidelines are pure, well, that that's kind of that's outside of like this rationalistic, like worldly acceptance. It moves beyond that, and you take a social contract into saying that this is the ground that I trust in, and it's the ground that I operate on, and I've used it to make X and X and X, X decisions. Therefore, because of this decision, although it may, put up some red flags in my right brain, my left brain is saying, yes, but we're safe here. And my right brain can shut the hell up. Um, and so you see this, right? You see this very clearly. If uh, you might hear it in conversations if somebody's describing, oh, well, I heard from this doctor who I trust said this. Right? And so then we're using the doctors, and then the doctors are saying that against the other people, and then they're just building their own little collective trust. In the guidelines, the vaccines are safe. I've seen it on the commercial. My girlfriend's aunt is pregnant. She got it. And, everything is fine. Baby's great. And the doctors who might see adverse side effects, they might see a pattern emerge in the world that they're not used to. But guess what? It's easy to ignore it because safety, right? And if safety is why we shut down a country, then safety is also a reason why we preserve our own livelihood at all costs, right? And I hope you see how this is not something I say lightly, because I think it's convicting of many people, including myself, as I've decided to make decisions for my own safety. And it's deeply saddening because of the environment that this kind of conduces. It's saddening to see people so willingly fall for this this mark of perfection. They this we've come so far in this progressive society that we're so enlightened that we can make the claim that what we are doing is the best thing, we collectively, and what you personally are doing, the one person, is wrong. And it's wrong because it goes against what the broader majority say. And in this postmodern world, I want nothing of. This is atrocious. This is the worst possible enantiodromia, to use a Jungian term. It's the tendency for things to turn into their opposites. And so the postmoderns, who are extremely cautious with anything rigid and ideological, because all things can be seen from a different view, ultimately end up turning into these ideologues who are pushing the state narrative. And that's intentional. I think that that's necessary for their line of thought, but it's also seductively intoxicating, I think, for people who are not used to it. It's it's something. It's a trap. If you use a stock trading term, it's like a bull trap. Um, the banks will make the stock go up. Looks like it's going to the moon. All the little guys, I'm here in my computer and I buy it because it's going up. And as soon as they see all the buys come in from us little measly folks, they pull the rug and they sell it all. And it's like it looks like it's a tried and true thing. It looks like it's for sure. It looks like if I adhere to this um, state guidance, um, then we save the world. And not only is the state the safe place, but it's also the savior. God help us. See ya.